Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. Nate Maxon, your host, here with you, and this little episode here is just a special little thing I'm going to do with the holidays upon us, and I wanted to take some time to do a couple of things. First is to wish each and every one of you, whatever holiday you celebrate, whether you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or no holiday at all, and just enjoy the holiday season because you don't have to work or something to that effect. I want each and every one of you and your families to have a very happy holiday because we do appreciate all of you here at the WNR Podcast Network and your support. And I also wanted to take this time for some thank yous. I want to thank especially the crazy cast of characters here at the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. Of course, my brother Aaron, thank you so much. The man I call Senor Archie Mitchell, thank you so much. Mark Brew, David Gold, all my boys over at the Asylum and the Asylum Wrestling Store, thank you. Go check that out, by the way. And then, of course, I also want to thank the OG of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast, Mr. Kyle Army, and, of course, Chris Wood, who helps us out moderating our Facebook group. But thank you to you guys, too, and happy holidays to everybody involved here at the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. And then, of course, happy holidays to Mr. Chad Austin, our co-host on Reliving the Extreme. The next thing I wanted to do here was to mention some great supporters of the show, some friends of the show, and thank them, and talk about them and their shows as well. Mr. Dave Dynasty. Dave is a good friend and a great partner as far as helping to, we kind of co-promote each other's stuff and all that, and that's great and wonderful, but he and I also both big fans of the history of wrestling and talking about wrestling, and that's why we do these things. So thank you, Dave Dynasty, for not only having been a guest on our show this year, but also helping us by letting people know about our shows and our products. And we do the same for Dave because he is a great guy. So definitely check out Dave on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, and also the This Is Extreme podcast, where Dave is going and talking to the people that were actually there in ECW. It's different than what we do on Reliving the Extreme. Reliving the Extreme, obviously, we just do a show review, recap as we go through the history of the company. But Dave's really diving deep with his show, This Is Extreme. So check that out on any podcast platform. And, of course, Wrestling Nostalgia. Both fantastic shows, especially for people who are big fans of the history of professional wrestling. And speaking of the history of professional wrestling, a man that I got to become friends with this year, that from my childhood was somebody that I read him all the time. When I was a kid, I read the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, loved each and every page, each and every picture, each and every letter. And this man was the managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated for a while, Mr. Bob Smith. And Bob Smith, of course, joined us on the show at one point this year, and I was on his show as well. And Bob is another great friend of the show and does another great, fantastic podcast that you should definitely check out. And that is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. And you should go check it out right now because it's one of my go-to listens every single week as a podcast listener, not just a podcaster, and a wrestling fan. The Outdated Wrestling Hour, Bob Smith. And Bob, thank you for your support this year. Thank you for being on the show earlier this year. And thank you for having me on your show this year. And of course, Bob and I are talking about in the new year, we'll be doing some more synergy. We talked about it a little bit. So I'm glad to have Bob as a supporter, a listener, and a friend. And then one more guy I want to give a shout out here to real quick that has one of my favorite podcasts as well, and was also a guest earlier this year on the We Can't Wrestle podcast, is Brian R. Solomon. Brian R. Solomon has the Shut Up and Wrestle podcast as part of the Arcadian Vanguard Network, and that is another one of my, I have to listen to this show every single week because Brian really is one of those people that likes to have conversations like I do about the history of the business without a bunch of meh, you know, and Brian does a great job on his show, and I want to thank him for being on our show and his support as well. And, of course, he's a great author. My favorite wrestling book of all time, Blood and Fire, the biography of the original Sheik, a very, very good book. And I know Brian is working on another book about Gorilla Monsoon that I'm really looking forward to. So definitely, like I said, go check out Brian R. Solomon, Shut Up and Wrestle. Another fantastic podcast for you to listen to in the wrestling podcast sphere that we are all kind of part of. The next thank you is, I have decided to thank a couple of our listeners and give a shout out to them because these are listeners that I know I've had quite a bit of interaction with. And I know for a fact that they are big supporters of our show and sharing our things and all that stuff. So I want to thank Nathan Roberts. Thank you, Nathan, for being a great listener and a great friend of the show, and Mandy Pesci as well. Mandy, Nathan, thank you for your support. I mean, thank all of you fans for your support, but those two are definitely two that I know are out there letting people know what they love about the WNR Podcast Network, and I appreciate your support and all of our listeners' support every single day. But thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Mandy. Know that we appreciate you. And last, but certainly not least, on this short edition of the show this week, I wanted to talk about it's coming. It's my favorite thing to do every year. The nominations are out there. The ballots are out there. It is the We Can't Wrestle Podcast Hall of Fame. As you know, it's just a little fun exercise that I like to do. It's fun. It's fun for me. I don't know. I'm just that kind of guy. I love doing stuff like this. And it gives great conversation about the history of the business. That's the most important thing when you're doing a podcast, right? Audio, conversation. And that's what this Hall of Fame does. And for those of you that listen, you know that we already have done this show since 2020, the Hall of Fame. And when I give people essentially at the beginning, we have a nominating round where people get to nominate people that are not already on the ballot, because you get to be on the ballot for 5 years. And then after 5 years, you have to go back to the nominating process. And that can be frustrating for old Nate. I'll tell you why here in just a second. But I guess technically I frustrated myself because I'm the one that made the rules. But anyway, of course, the criteria to consider for someone to be in the We Can't Wrestle Podcast Hall of Fame or you're nominated for it is 10 plus years as a pro wrestler. And I always say exceptions can be made in the case of, say, Magnum TA, who, obviously he wasn't going to be able to do that. But in-ring ability, promo ability, being of significance to the business, whether as a whole or to a certain promotion or territory, drawing power, and for tag teams, they need to have been a consistent team for at least one calendar year. And the mix of people that we have on our panel bring names to the table. I don't have really any control over anything except my own nominations and my own ballot. But coming up this year, we have the 2023 ballot. And there were so many names thrown in the nomination process that were warranted being on a ballot, that the ballot actually extended this year from 25 to 30. So that's pretty interesting. But here's where it gets really interesting. There are two people that are still on this ballot from the first year we did it. They've both been on the ballot for 4 years. I've been pushing to get them into this Hall of Fame because of their significance all 4 years, and they're still there. So hopefully they get voted in this year. But the ballot that went out, and I'll tell you who has how many years on the ballot too. The ballot that went out after the nominations came in this year, the 2023 We Can't Wrestle Podcast ballot, Hall of Fame ballot, I should say. Stu Hart is on there. He's been on the ballot for 4 years. I'm pushing again. Every year I vote for Stu, and every year I get outvoted. Sting has been on the ballot for 4 years. Not a guy I vote for. I don't look at him as a Hall of Famer. Ricky Dozan should already be in this damn Hall of Fame, and he's not yet. He's been on the ballot for 4 years. Come on. I'm trying to get him into my own frickin' Wrestling Hall of Fame this year. But anyway, Mick Foley's been on the ballot for 3 years. Arn Anderson's been on the ballot for 3 years. The Rock, 3 years. Bob Backlund, 3 years. Vader, 2 years. Ted DiBiase, 2 years. JYD, 2 years. Another guy I'm pushing to get in. Midnight Express, 2 years. Sherry Martel, 2 years. Rick Rude, 2 years. Rick Steamboat, 2 years. Sergeant Slaughter, 2 years. The Sheik, another guy I'm pushing to get in, has been on the ballot for 2 years. John Cena for 2 years. And then the rest of these people are all new to the ballot this year. Rey Mysterio Jr., Antonio Inoki, Nick Bockwinkel, Gorilla Monsoon, Chris Jericho, Trish Stratus, Kane, Jimmy Hart, Gorgeous George, Bruiser Brody, the Von Erichs, that is obviously David, Kevin, and Kerry, Eddie Guerrero, and Buddy Rose. And I was assuming as I was getting the nominations in, I think the Von Erichs, not that they weren't great, but I think they got kind of a movie bump this year. So welcome to the ballot. And like I said, for me, The 3 that I'm really championing this year, we each get to vote for 8. Everybody gets to vote for 8 names. But the 3 that I'm really championing this year are Stu, Hart, and Ricky Dozon, who I've been championing since the beginning, and of course, the original Sheik. So we'll see how it all lays out, though, because just because I'm the curator doesn't mean that I have the final say. The guys are sending me back their votes on the ballot, and the Hall of Fame will be coming up. Actually, next week, we should have the final numbers for who is in, who are the 8 names that get in this year. I guess I should have mentioned... who's already in. Sorry. Let's do that real quick. For those of you that are maybe new listeners or don't remember, so far, 2020, 2021, and 2022, the names that are already in the Hall of Fame: Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, The Undertaker, Bobby Heenan, Andre the Giant, Randy Savage, Vince McMahon Jr., Steve Austin, Terry Funk, Dusty Rhodes, Bruno Sammartino, Jerry Lawler, Harley Race, Jim Cornette, Bret Hart, Lou Thez, the Road Warriors, Roddy Piper, Shawn Michaels, Gene Okerlund, Fred Blassie, Buddy Rogers, Kurt Hennig, and Paul Heyman. Some of those I agree with, some of those I don't, but that's the beauty of this whole project. I really enjoy it. But anyway, I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to round it out just the way I started it. I really do, from the bottom of my heart, want to wish each and every one of you a very happy holiday season. Big things coming for our podcast network in 2024. We're going to try some new things, shake some things up. It's going to be fun. But until then, we'll see you all next time for the next episode of the We Can't Wrestle Podcast. Have a good one, everybody.